I am pleased to also now introduce our next panel. This is a spicy topic, custodial versus non-custodial wallets. As a result, there is no one else better to moderate this than our General Counsel, Candace Kelly. A lot of people think that Chief Legal Officer, excuse me. Marketing and legal, there's often, anyone who works in marketing, that relationship sometimes can be strained. But we don't have that at SDF because Candace and her team are amazing. And so I'm pleased to introduce Candace to moderate the next panel.
Oh, you guys, come on, come on. The formalities are over. It's the afternoon.
I'd like to be in the middle. Okay.
Well, thanks, Jordan. I'm glad to hear that publicly he thinks we have no tension between our teams, but it's because I have an awesome team and he has an awesome team, so thank you. So thanks, everyone. We are here to talk about custodial versus non-custodial wallets. As the Chief Legal Officer, formerly known as the General Counsel, I like to call that self-hosted as opposed to custodial, non-custodial. Just kind of works a little better with what it really is. But I will first have you all introduce yourselves and to make sure that everyone kind of knows your perspective. If you could just give a little bit of like where you are and kind of your perspective on wallets. We'll start with Ledger. I think most people in this space know Ledger. So Alex, if you want to start.
Thank you so much. Extremely happy to be here. First and foremost, afternoon session. We're getting towards the end of the day. Please text your friends. Let's fill the room. It's a very hot topic. We're going to make this interesting for you guys, I promise. I'll go really quickly. We have a ton of content to cover. So I'm Alex. I spent majority of my career in traditional financial services and capital markets, primarily with NASDAQ, primarily banging my head against the wall in the topic of innovation in financial services. So 2 years ago, I decided that I tortured myself enough and decided to join Ledger and dive into crypto headfirst. So I've been aware of the different topics in crypto for a very long time, traditional finance, now with crypto. So I think many of you know Ledger. It's a very well-known brand in the crypto industry. We're primarily known for the self-custody wallets, the Ledger Nano. So my position is probably clear on this topic. But I'm actually responsible for Ledger's enterprise business. So in the same vein that we offer services to our retail audience for self-custody, security, and governance, we do the very same for institutions, so that institutions can provide their services to retail audiences and do that with security, governance, and processes and control. That's it for me.
Great. Jeff?
So I'm Jeff Goodell. I'm a lecturer at University College London, in London. And my research is on socio-technical systems, in particular digital currency and central bank digital currency, and socio-technical financial systems more generally. My angle on this has mostly come from the perspective of privacy, end-user possession, end-user control, and the kinds of architectures and characteristics of these systems that we would need to deliver those characteristics. With respect to custodial versus non-custodial wallets, I think we first have to start with the definition of wallet. When we say that a wallet is a software or hardware module that allows for the storage and management of digital assets, then the question of custodial versus non-custodial flows from that. I think that it's hard to imagine a world without both, although I think we need to think very carefully about what these different use cases are for. Thank you.
Great.
I'm Keel. I'm with the Chief Growth Officer of WireX. I've been with WireX for about 6 months. Prior to that, I worked at a non-custodial or self-hosted payments protocol. And before that, spent a number of years in regulated healthcare payments and investing. And so my perspective is going to be, at WireX, we have both our custodial solutions that we offer in a regulated space to 40 different countries, as well as a actual self-hosted of sorts MPC wallet. that is a little bit different than other types of wallets that we're talking about here. So there's different blends and flavors of hosted versus unhosted wallets.
All right. Well, and we're going to get into that in case there's some folks who don't know MPC, but we're going to get into some of the solutions and some of the challenges that this is a space that's constantly evolving. And I think one takeaway from this morning, listening to Alexis, was obviously, what do people want? And just from listening to the three of you, we first have to define who are those people, right? Are they individual people who want to engage in peer-to-peer transactions? Is it a central bank? Is it a business? And so my first question to each of you is sort of like, who are the people whose wants you are trying to meet in your, and yours you may have like a whole slew of them, but we'll start with you, Alex.
Sure, sounds good. But socio-technical, I love that. Would love to understand that better. I'm a technologist from by training, so that could be a very interesting thing to dive into more deeply. It's very relevant to our topic. So on the ledger side, I'll get the marketing spiel out of the way at the beginning, so I don't have to cover it again. We've sold over 5 million devices, so over 5 million hardware wallets to date, which means there's generally good adoption on the retail side. But 5 million is a relatively low percentage of overall adoption of crypto. However, on those 5 million devices, we currently control 15 to 20% of all crypto. So the entire marketplace, the entire market of crypto, 15 to 20% is on a Ledger Nano. So the disproportionate amount of assets on a smaller audience tells us that our primary focal point, our primary audience, is heavy users. People that have invested early, that are knowledgeable, that understand the space, that have invested and are managing larger portions of assets in the crypto space.
Okay, so you're like the hardcore crypto folks who probably know and understand this responsibility that they're taking on when they get a self-hosted wallet. Is
exactly.
that a fair summary?
That's the current state, right? And that was the genesis of Ledger when we started 8 years ago now, right? So we're relatively early on in the crypto cycle, and then we've grown with our audience. The thing that's important to understand that now Ledger is a relatively large company, and we're developing up stack. So you're kind of walking on a curve between security, education, and ease of use. And as we evolve, you have to invest drastically in education. Because you want to build the awareness and the understanding, and the industry's been helping us in that regard with the recent hacks and the contractions of the market, right? When you put a system under stress, the awareness of the limitations of that system become much more readily understandable, and that's what we're experiencing now. It's both, a positive and a negative. It's kind of, the silver lining for us as Ledger because people now understand what we actually do, but it's obviously negative for the market itself.
Yeah.
I think you're saying that when the tide goes out, that's when you discover who's swimming naked.
That's exactly right.
Keel, do you want to, since
Sure.
you have users?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, we're in 40 different countries. We have 5 million customers. I'd say active, fewer than that. However, I probably own 12 of your Ledger wallets at this point as well, so we'll see.
We have a solution for that.
Do you have a solution for the metal plates I've also chiseled in and hidden around the world?
Yes.
Anyway, I joke. So we really focus on how do we create accessibility, and how do we create accessibility for the retail consumer that may be looking to put $10, $20, $100, $1,000 at once, at 1 week, at 1 month, and have access to digital assets. And then we provide that last mile utility where we actually provide utility of payment. So you can swipe your debit card and you can spend using your digital assets. And so that requires, in our world, a custody solution so that we're able to remove those assets and spend them at point of sale.
But you mentioned that you had some at least pseudo self-hosted
so
or
then
some
we
custodial. So can you talk a little bit more about that?
So there's two sides of our business. The first is the custodial side, and the second is our non-custodial MPC wallet. So a multi-party computational wallet. So essentially, the way that the private keys are derived, we do it in. Jeff will be able to describe this much better than I can probably. But effectively, we're able to derive a key, and it's effectively sharded into multiple pieces, and your key is never actually disclosed. So multiple parties are actually signing the transaction, and it enables you to effectively create a wallet have complete control of your wallet, but never actually have the ability to have access to your private key unless you withdraw it completely, in which case you break the MPC, and you basically now have to transition that private key to something like a ledger or something like a software wallet, so you're able to access using that private key. What that enables users to do is essentially onboard in a way that's more similar to Web 2. You can sign up with an email address. You can encrypt it with a facial print, a fingerprint, and you're able to then access those assets anywhere, access the assets anywhere in the world, as long as you have access to a mobile device that can access a wallet.
And your own biometrics.
And you need your face.
Okay. Well, most of us travel with that.
But we joke that you're more likely to lose your mnemonic or your private key than you are to lose your face. It's not a perfect answer, but not your face, not your crypto.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Although the attack vector there is quite drastic.
Yeah. So I think that this is one of, like, as this industry has evolved, I mean, obviously, the early days, it was like, oh my gosh, self-hosted, you're taking 100% of the responsibility. You see all these crazy stories about people wanting to go through landfill to find their key that's on some hard drive that they threw out. And it sounds like there's evolution in solving that problem of the lost key problem, right? That seemed like that was the biggest challenge with self-hosted. So if we're getting to a place, whether we're there now or there's your self-hosted wallet.
This is my self-hosted wallet right here.
Love that.
It works pretty well. I get really good privacy characteristics.
Just reach out and grab that. You can just steal it.
Yeah, it has a serial number on it, but thankfully no one is looking at it. And basically, what's nice about this is that it's in my possession and it's under my control. Both of those things. And both of those things are really needed. If it's in my possession but not under my control, as it would be with a system that uses trusted hardware or secure enclaves, for example, then ultimately my use of this would be subject to the will of some other party. So when we think about non-custodial wallets, from my perspective, I'm thinking about a wallet that's in my possession, under my control, that I haven't given to someone else. Now, yes, there could be a risk of me losing it, but with the digital world, we can actually mitigate that pretty significantly. I can actually copy the data. I can store encrypted, sharded copies in different places if I want to. I can share it among my friends. I can put it in online data centers. There are lots of options that I've got. And I think that we need to be really careful about our definitions of possession and control, because if a user wants to, they can put something into someone else's possession. If I want to have someone else have control, maybe that's useful in some cases. Like, for example, if I want to have automated payments, or if I want to have a special kind of all-encompassing user experience in a certain kind of limited application. But ultimately, not your possession, not your control, and that means it's not your asset.
Yeah.
And I think that the problem with the debit card model is that when we're spending money, what we really have are, when we're spending money with debit cards, what we really have is a legal claim on the balance sheet of financial institutions, and that's not the same as ownership.
So I want to ask you that. So theoretically, yes, I want to have possession of my own value, right? We're moving. That's what Web3 is all about, is having that control. And but at the same time, that control comes with this responsibility. So you have responsibility for making sure that's in your pocket and it's not going to fall out, or you're not going to put it somewhere where someone wants to just grab it. There's so many people here in Rome. Well, finding myself like holding my bag a little closer. So, and you also have, like your risk tolerance there from the legal perspective here is, you could count the number of bills in there. I won't make you do it, but you know that if that falls out of your pocket, you're still going to be able to make it home probably. So when we shift into this, we come from that mindset of like, okay, small amounts, I feel good about controlling it, but larger amounts, I'm going to put it in a bank, right, for those of us who have the privilege of having a bank account and having the ability to have that. So where is that like continuum of where the control and the responsibility can and should shift, and how can technology make it better than cash? right? That's what we want to always be doing, is we have cash. We always look to cash. It's the model. It's the self-hosted model. How do we use technology, and the blockchain technology in particular, to make it better than cash? And Alex clearly wants to answer that question.
I love that question, and I think it's important. Ooh,
uh-oh.
Sorry, disrupted. So I think it's important to highlight this because as exciting and enticing the title of this panel was, right, I don't think it's a binary answer. Right, so there is no, there's a lot of gray in between self-custody and third-party custody. And we really do have to look at the different use cases. The point being is credit cards are much more attractive from a retail usage perspective, right? You get points, you lose it, nothing happens. Somebody steals it from you and uses it, it's insured, you don't have to pay for it in most cases, right? So the model is much more attractive, yet people still carry cash. I carry less cash than I ever used to, but I think that's the value proposition that technology can bring, right? And blockchain and crypto as an ecosystem, as a technology offering, is starting to elevate our ability and our trust models into the tech itself. So you're getting more and more comfortable of having not $50 in your wallet, but a couple $100,000. Right? And then there's other services that you can bolt on top of that that will continue to raise that threshold to the extent where banks may not necessarily be in a position where they're just there to securely custody your assets for you. They will be in a position where they actually have to bring value-added services towards those assets to be in the ecosystem and to create that value. And I think for us in our position, I kind of find myself in the middle of this balance is, Ledger at its genesis focused on retail audiences, right? But very quickly you realize that the adoption curve on that, going from 5 million to billions of users that all have hardware wallets, it's going to take time, right? It's going to take a lot of development. And on the enterprise side, with Ledger Enterprise, what we do is we empower institutions to create services where they will custody crypto assets for their user base. So we're addressing both of the lines of growth in that regard because for us, really, it's about adoption at the end of the day. And if you look at any market system on the adoption aspect, you need value creation, right? And you need to do that securely and efficiently. And you need value consumption, the retail audience. And you also need to do that securely and efficiently. And if we're able to complete that loop from both of those angles, then the entire industry grows.
So I guess I'd like to say I agree with you. I agree with your conclusion, right?
Right.
So I agree that there is a spectrum, that it is use case driven, that there will be custodial and non-custodial use cases. Totally agree. But I think my reasons might be a bit different. So normally when I think about what banks do, I think banks, in the traditional kind of economic sense, they take deposits and they make investments. They create money. Typically now they create money through fractional reserve banking. They can lend more than they have in terms of their deposits. This is all I think. Some people might disagree, but I think this is a good thing. The value add of banks principally is that, right? But they have other value adds as well, right? They allow me to invest in securities, perhaps. They allow me to receive payments in a compliance centric kind of way that eliminates me from having to worry as much about my tax filings. They allow me to, in some cases, even earn interest. Imagine that. We might see this again with rising interest rates. What I'm concerned about is this tendency for banks to have shifted from that traditional model to the model of payment service provider. And I don't think that that's banking. And I don't think that that is worthy of a bailout, right? And that's different from their role in banking. Now, why is that important? Well, I think when I think about the value add of digital payments through non-custodial wallets in particular, I think about the idea that we're facilitating payments. We're taking the payer's bank out of the loop of payments effectively. And I think that that's a good thing, because I think that that's where we see the value for privacy. I think that's where we see the value for control, the value for someone knowing that the money is going to be accepted, all of that. I don't think that that's incompatible with having people still store most of their money in bank accounts. It's not incompatible with having custodial wallets in some cases, and it's certainly not incompatible with backups. So I think there is a spectrum here, but I think that really the value of non-custodial wallets is about facilitating payments, and I think that's different than imagining this as a store of value.
I think it's interesting. So we talk a lot about payments and custody versus non-custody. But I guess if we look at where the market's going, how do we think about identity management? Should I be in custody of my own identity in a non-custodial wallet? Or should it be encrypted? Like, how should we think about identity?
I have a very direct answer for that. I think it should be your choice. Right? So I think the primary value proposition of self-custody is freedom of choice. Right? So you start there, yep. And then you as an individual get to decide what services on top of that you want and how far you're willing to give up your control to take advantage of the services that are being offered to you. Right? And I think that's a very clear, delineation there. Primarily because I think what you mentioned about banks is exactly right. Right? The original model was to offer value-added services, not to take control of your assets. And it's now a bit more blurry than it used to be in that regard. But I think there's always going to be a place for omnibus accounts for certain aspects because economies of scale are an economic truth, right? Like we're never going to get away from economies of scale. So we're always going to be pooling capital to do certain things. And in which case, the banks are going to need to be able to execute those models and will need the right governance and components. And obviously, the great thing is a lot of those models are going to be moving towards blockchain-based solutions because those are going to be the most efficient rails.
So can I ask, sorry, on the identity piece, so there's a whole separate panel, I think it's tomorrow, on digital identity, but I'm just at a high level from your vantage points, like what are the solutions that you're seeing in terms of, if there is this need, if I want to own my own value and own my own identity and have control over what I'm sharing, have you seen those solutions out there? Are they happening? Are they being, do you have?
Yeah, I would say there's a handful of ways to look at identity. You can look at my anonymous on-chain identity, which effectively comes back to this idea of do I own the drive?
That sounds like an oxymoron.
Do I own the?
Is it pseudonymous?
It could be pseudonymous, yes.
Pseudonymous. Okay.
And so the question then is, if I'm accessing different entry points into the ecosystem, should I be able to control it? And I would say yes, right? I think that's actually one you'd want to be able to control fully. But the question is that how do we adopt and drive that to, retail consumers in all parts of the world who may not necessarily have the same technology literacy that we have? Cash is very simple, right? It's tangible. I can touch it. Everyone gets it. It has colors. It has tactile feel in some countries. It's made in a way that is like to support.
Well, it's nice. My wallet is also important here. This is the cash, but this is the wallet. The wallet doesn't have any identity associated with it at all. This is really important. In order for me to be in control, this wallet cannot be identifiable.
You never keep your driver license in there?
Never.
Smart.
But it's really important because, it's a very strange world that we're in. If every time that we want to go buy a cup of coffee in Stockholm, the coffee shops are demanding you to show ID. That's bananas. I think this is really important. EIDAS-2, which is a proposal that's in the European Union right now, suggests implicitly that wallets should have some kind of identity associated with them. I think that's a very, very serious mistake. Mm-hmm. The wallets themselves should be under the control of their users. Their users should decide what to do with them, what to put inside, what not to put inside, how to identify themselves on their own terms. Right. If they require identification for something, that's their responsibility. But the fact that they want to exchange assets must not intrinsically rely upon that identification.
I agree with you 100%.
We've been speaking a lot about, from a very user-centric perspective, like and that's how I started, that's how Alexis started us off today, like what do users want? I think in the Web 2 world, what do users want? Oftentimes it didn't involve value transfer. So now that we're talking about Web 3, we're talking about custody, and we're talking about value, we have to all, you can do it with me now, put on your regulator hat and think about what do those people want. Those regulators are people too. I was one of them for many years, so they're good, well-intentioned people. So how do we maintain this control and this privacy and this I want to be able to make my payments on my own, I want to own my own digital identity, and also have the correct kind of balance of compliance and know your customer and travel rule and things like that?
I have an interesting parallel to draw to the real world today, to that question. We're just having a discussion in the hall a little bit, which was surprising to me. When you talk about regulation, right, at the end of the day, it really comes down to enforcement, right? So what are you able to do to make sure that people are behaving in a way that the regulation is there to support? If you don't have enforcement, you don't have teeth, right? So that's a very important concept, because if you think about a real world today's parallel, I have a government-issued ID, which is my driver license. I've had this very personal experience where I was living in the US for most of my life, then I moved to Switzerland. I was speeding in Switzerland, they took away my American license, I got a Swiss license. Don't ask. And then I moved to and then I moved to
later.
and then I moved to France. So now I live in Paris. The banking aspect of that was completely bonkers. So that's a really interesting personal discovery as well. Let's go with crypto. And then the second aspect of this, my Swiss driver license works in France very easily. It has a 4-year expiry date on it. And if I didn't pay for my ticket in Switzerland.
Wait, sorry, how many years?
4.
Oh, okay.
4.
I thought I heard 40. I was
No,
like,
yeah,
whoa,
4. That would be amazing, right?
You could be a really bad
so there is an
years.
enforcement constraint of 4 years
4
there,
years.
right?
Got it. Thank you.
So if I didn't pay my speeding ticket in Switzerland, they could nullify my license. But because I have the physical one, and I am in France, I can drive in France. The French authorities have no way of validating whether that license is valid or not. So until I actually come to Switzerland and break the law, they have absolutely no enforcement capability. So that is the nature of a barrier instrument, like a driver license, like the origin of a stock certificate, right? The physical representation is the value. And there's limited enforcement capabilities associated with that, and you have to pull in with the jurisdiction of the enforcement mechanism for anybody to be able to take action. Which is actually a very interesting concept if you take that into the global aspect of crypto and distributed networks. Is where is that enforcement? What is the regulatory framework that needs to be applied? And generally that has to do with the domicile of the individual, but we're getting more and more mobile as a human race, which is actually a great thing. So for me, really the evolution of crypto and the ability to do value over the internet is the next phase of globalization, the next phase of mobility, that you can actually take your assets with you. And under that context, self-sovereignty, self-custody, ability to walk onto an airplane with my nano, land somewhere, and be able to monetize those assets as I need to, or be able to actually buy things of value with that crypto is paramount.
Yeah. Okay, but what if the funds that you have in your nano are illicitly obtained funds? Like, should there be no enforcement? Should we just be moving to a world where, because it's in your nano and you flew to another country and they'll accept that, that's...
Let's not let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Who knows where this came from? I'm going to use this money to buy coffee, and no one is going to ask me where I got this money. And that's going to be a strength, not a weakness. Now, I'm not saying that regulators don't have some legitimate interests in knowing certain things, but not about what I spend my money on. That's not legitimate.
Are you? So, would you? It's easy to talk about in the context of a cup of coffee, but let's talk about a house or a yacht or a plane.
Let's be clear. I don't think that people are going to anytime soon. I don't think that people are going to be using digital currency or central bank digital currency to buy houses. Why is that? I think it's a question of like with like. A thing in your possession for a thing in your possession. A legal claim for a legal claim. A house is a legal claim, effectively, whereas a cup of coffee is a thing in my possession. With a thing in my possession, I want to be able to spend objects in my possession and control for those things. for things that are ultimately legal claims, these are intrinsically identified. And that's something that I think will necessitate a different form of payment. I do not believe that there will be one payment rails to use to rule them all. I think that there will be different kinds of payments, payment systems to address different kinds of payment scenarios, which have different sets of costs and risks. Cross-border is one, domestic retail is another. They have different requirements. They will have different systems. Domestic retail payments for buying houses will be very different than domestic retail payments for buying cups of coffee. And let's be clear, with regulators, regulators have several interests that are legitimate, right? They do want to know, for example, that the recipients of money are tax compliant, which means that we probably do want the recipients of transactions to be identified. But that doesn't mean that we want the payers to be identified, and that's really important. Anyone who tells you that we need that in order to achieve tax compliance, we need to know the payer of every transaction is lying to you. The second thing is that regulators might also have a legitimate interest in KYC, AML. Maybe they do. If so, they can enforce that at the time that money is received. They can enforce that at the withdrawal of money, as they do with bank withdrawals or ATM withdrawals. They can enforce it at the time that recipients of money deposit it into their bank accounts. But that doesn't mean that we have to profile individuals' transactions, and that does not mean that we have to subject individuals to the possibility that their next transaction might fail. And I think that we need to clear the air on some of the assumptions here and identify what presumed regulatory desiderata are legitimate and which ones are not legitimate.
Yeah, I mean, I would argue from well, what's funny, so I would argue from our side, right? So effectively, we touch a fiat rail. So we need to know the funds that have come into our system when they're being spent are legitimate. And we have policies and procedures in place. Our compliance team is 120 people strong. Ultimately, you can hold an unlimited amount of assets on chain and transfer them in. And as you know, we have certain criteria that need to be met. At some point, you may flag a review where we actually ask, can you please give us more information on the source of funds? But ultimately, that's because we're touching fiat. And I think there's a need that if you want to spend, $50,000, $60,000 on a debit card, we personally, because the regulators, I think, have probably failed this industry substantially at this point, are enforced to effectively track that. And it can be, I've been defunded personally from Citibank because I touched crypto. God forbid I touched crypto. And it was a 90-day experience where they froze my funds, they seized my assets, and they said, we're not giving them back to you until you can prove where they came from. And it was quite crazy. But ultimately, like our company, our organization, what we focus on is making that as low of a burden as possible for source of funds reviews. Ultimately, we occasionally do have to lock users. We have to basically be compliant with the regulatory regimes that we're operating within. Those look more like fiat regulatory regimes than necessarily crypto regulatory regimes. But we're touching digital assets. We're converting them into fiat. We're effectively buying property from users. It's how it works.
So I immediately, I don't know if there are any people here who are Canadian, but my immediate thought was about the Ottawa truckers incident in this past February. And basically, there was an objection. It involved anti-vaxxing and all these sorts of things. Without opining on that, I think it was really breathtaking how banks had basically cut off certain people from the economy because they could. I think this should worry us irrespective of whether we agree with those Canadian truckers or not. And the worry about the cashless society is not a worry about people having bank accounts or occasionally getting cut off from their bank accounts, but the worry that people don't have a way of spending money other than through their accounts, I think should give us all pause.
Did you know any bank in the United States can cut you off without any process? They can just close your account down?
I do know that.
Yeah.
So then why would you, then why don't you carry at least some cash?
Also in France.
Also, yeah.
But
Well, I have assets on chain.
And this, of course, is rooted in FATF.
And that's why there's a continuum, right? We need a continuum of you have to have self-sovereign funds. You need to have funds in order to operate in the economy that has been built up today, where it is what it is. And then we think about the future path forward. And we are big believers of moving away from fiat and moving more to crypto-based payments. Ultimately, it's a 5 to 7 year continuum that's underway, and we've been hitting it for 5 to 7 years already, and it's continuing down that path.
And I want to, I'm going to circle. We have like 5 more minutes, so if there are questions out there, I will take questions when I ask this one last one. But I can't. I have to circle back to the. You don't think that people are going to start using crypto to pay for kind of large purchases? And maybe this is just because I was a federal prosecutor for many, many years, and to me, what you're analogizing to cash, and certainly. I put a lot of people in jail for using their drug proceeds and their white-collar scam, Ponzi scheme proceeds to buy all of those things, to buy clothes, to buy houses, to buy planes, to buy yachts. It happens, and those folks who are exchanging are supposed to be complying, and there are rules, whether it's in the cash world. And so I guess my question to you is, why is the crypto world different? So if we get to these higher denomination payments, it sounds like you're saying, Jeff, that you don't think that the regulators have a legitimate reason to look into that.
Well, I don't think that regulators have let me be clear. I don't think that regulators have a legitimate reason to have a backdoor into any transaction, into the payer of any transaction. I don't. Backdoors are bad. We know why backdoors are bad.
I'm not talking about backdoors.
Right,
I'm talking about front doors and being clear about who's the payer.
Now, front doors, this idea of, well, are there some kinds of transactions for which regulators require identification? Well, the answer is, well, that's already true in most of the world. Most of the FATF compliant world has limits above which, if you have a transaction of a certain size, the recipient must ask you for additional information. And by the way, with a non-cash world, we can impose compliance rules on the recipient of money, and that is huge. Compliance rules applied at the recipient of money is an area where even a privacy-respecting digital currency can actually provide much better, much stronger compliance enforcement than cash. Because once we embed and require by design the embedding of recipient identities or bank account numbers into transactions, we can actually make sure that that transaction is regulated and observed in a way that not all cash transactions are, while still allowing payers to be private.
There you go. That's the answer to my question. How does
Right.
technology make it better? Because if I go over time, I'm going to challenge that relationship I have with Jordan and his team. So I'm watching the time, and I want to see if there are any burning questions you have for these experts up here. No? All right.
I have a question.
What's your question?
I have a question. I was doing my diligence before the panel, and I was looking through your website, and I came across a very interesting statement that you guys support a keyless, non-custodial wallet. Yeah.
Ours or his? Oh, okay. I was going to say that's the biometric.
A
Keyless non-custodial.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the WireX wallet. So you do not have, so there is a private key, it's sharded. You do not know your key, you do not know your mnemonic, you do not know the mechanism of which it was actually. So when you think about what are some of the core scams that are run online? It's predominantly MetaMask driven.
Yeah.
It's predominantly enter your 12 words to access your wallet. You'll never know any of those words because there was not, it was never
And how is that non-custodial?
How is it non-custodial?
Yeah.
That's a great question. So the way in which it's non-custodial is right now it's basically an automated signature that works. So there's multiple parties that are signing it.
Yeah.
Ultimately, you're in control. The moment you sign it, it looks for validity, and then it signs the rest of it.
And who are the parties?
Currently, they're automated mechanisms. The reason why it's non-custodial is you have the ability to withdraw your private key. So it's a blend.
Okay.
So it's interesting is if you couldn't withdraw the private key, in some jurisdictions it would be considered a custody solution because there's other parties associated with it.
Mm-hmm.
But the reason that you have the ability at any point in time to withdraw and reassemble the private key and withdraw it it becomes non-custodial.
So there's a recovery mechanism with the dependency. But
Yes, and
great,
I would guess that
gray
also
zone from a regulatory perspective.
there's no other individual entity that
No.
can sign without you as the holder. So that,
Exactly. That's the other.
That's kind of
Yeah, but the
key.
problem is if the entity on the other side of that recovery mechanism is unavailable for whatever reason,
Right.
you don't have access to your assets.
Right. So I would say that that means that you're not really in possession.
I would agree.
And I think that that's a risk. So I think we have to be careful with our definitions, right? When I say non-custodial, I mean a wallet that allows us to have full possession and full control over our assets. And that's something that I agree that we don't see a lot of this in the existing crypto world, but that doesn't mean that this will not be built. It will be built.
I agree.
And this is something that we need to design from the outset.
But the challenge is we have to go back to what is the technical literacy of the end consumer, and for us to address 6 billion users and get them access to on-chain assets, we have to look at ways where it may not be a perfect world, but there's a way that we can give them and empower them to bring them into the fold.
Agreed 100%.
Yeah. I agree that this has to happen, but I'm saying it will happen, right? I mean, think back to the idea of personal computers in the 1970s, right? Who will have a personal computer? No one. And now, everyone has personal computers. I mean, many people can operate heavy machinery in ways that they couldn't in the 1800s. Many people have all of these capabilities, and we didn't suddenly embark on some grand-scale education campaign in order to make this possible either. This was something that emerged organically.
Yeah.
It will also emerge organically here. We just need to know that we can't treat end users as children, because if we do, that's all that they will be.
Except they need to be educated, which I wanted to get back to your education question, but we are out of time. I was going to give you each a little bit of time, but my relationship with Jordan is too important. So I'm going to thank all of you, and everyone here can come up and ask you questions if they want. So.